October 12th, 2007. St. Emery Regional Medical Center. Night shift. The ER doors slid open with a hiss. Dr. Marcus Elwood barely acknowledged the sound. He was 3 hours into a 12-hour night shift, and the fluorescent lighting already felt like it had leached every molecule of warmth from his bones. A coffee cup with the name Marcus scrawled in fading Sharpie teetered dangerously on the nurse's station counter. "Dr. Elwood," Nurse Lorna called softly. "ICU's paging. They need a consult." He nodded. No words, just that tight jaw, that pace, always somewhere between urgent and numb. He hadn't taken a full day off in 4 weeks. The call light in room 3 was blinking red. By 1:14 a.m., the ICU consult was done. A 64-year-old post-op hip replacement with a mild reaction to morphine. Stable. But Marcus lingered in the hallway longer than he should have, looking at nothing, listening to the silent hum of machines beyond closed doors. He was tired, yes, but there was something else gnawing at him. He'd been noticing strange things: surgical carts being moved and returned with missing contents, operating room 3, which had been marked offline due to ventilation repairs for 2 months, showing activity logs after hours, unexplained access badge pings, and worst of all, the night shifts were starting to blur. Faces he didn't recognize, patients without records, and nurses who vanished by morning. 2:09 a.m. Marcus stood alone in the stairwell between ICU and the surgical wing, staring down at his pager. It buzzed in his palm. The screen read only 2 words: OR3. Now. He frowned. That wasn't protocol. Emergency calls came with patient codes, initials, procedure tags. OR3 now was a command. No name, no context. He dialed the nurse's desk. Lorna didn't pick up. He tried again. No answer. Another buzz. OR3 now. For a moment he considered ignoring it, but his gut told him otherwise. 2:13 a.m. The hall to OR3 was dimmer than the others. The overhead fluorescents buzzed faintly, flickering in sequence like dominoes tipping over. The walls carried an odd smell, like ammonia, but colder, metallic, wrong. The door to operating room 3 was ajar. That alone made no sense. Or doors were always sealed shut unless in active use. Marcus pushed it open, half expecting to see a janitor or maybe a confused intern. Instead he saw nothing. No patient, no scrub tech, no machines humming, just the soft green glow of surgical monitors in sleep mode and an open crash cart, drawers askew, a half-used vial of midazolam still lying uncapped. He took a step inside. "Hello?" he called, voice tightening. Silence answered. He crossed to the cart and bent down. The gel lining the drawer was slick and cold. Midazolam gel. It was rare, used in extreme sedation, usually during field traumas or pediatric cases when IV access was impossible. Why here? His pager buzzed again. OR3 now. But he was already in OR3. 2:15 a.m. Hospital security would later review the footage dozens of times. There, grainy and monochrome, was Dr. Marcus Elwood. Approaching OR3 alone. 3 minutes later, an orderly entered the West Hall, pushing a gurney with a heavily sedated patient toward the linen chute hallway. No one recognized the orderly. He wasn't on staff, had no badge, and wore generic scrubs with no ID. There were no further sightings of Dr. Elwood. He never clocked out, never came home. His coffee cup remained on the nurse's station counter for 3 days. 8 months later, June 2008. The city's South Creek water treatment plant suffered a brief mechanical failure during routine maintenance. A backup sewer pump kicked into gear with a metallic cough, and something small shot out from the intake grill, bouncing once before landing in a maintenance tray with a clink. A pager. Old, scratched, waterlogged. The screen flickered, rebooting through a pattern of characters before settling on a single, looping message. OR3. Now. Workers handed it to police, who traced the serial number within hours. It belonged to Dr. Marcus Elwood. But that wasn't the most disturbing detail. On the pager's outer casing was a sticky residue, faint but chemically distinct. Forensics confirmed it was sedative gel, specifically the midazolam formulation used exclusively in hospital operating room crash carts. Further DNA analysis revealed trace epithelial cells embedded in the gel. It was Marcus's DNA. He hadn't simply dropped the pager. He had been holding it, under duress, under sedation, or worse, when it was submerged, and someone had flushed it through the hospital's sewer system months after his disappearance. Detective Naomi Rivas stood in the maintenance bay of the treatment plant that afternoon, holding the evidence bag with gloved hands. The pager inside kept flickering, hopelessly stuck in its one-line loop. "Why now?" she muttered. "Why 8 months later?" The water treatment engineer beside her shrugged. "Could have gotten stuck in a trap. Sediment buildup, biofilm, who knows? That system's got miles of pipes." Rivas turned the pager over in her hand. She didn't like it. "Wherever it's been," she said, "someone wanted it found now, like a breadcrumb." She paused. Or a warning. June 2008. 2 weeks after the pager was found, Detective Naomi Rivas had handled overdose cases, hospital theft, even a locked-door suicide in a psych ward. But nothing about this case felt normal. Not the vanishing, not the pager, not the silence that surrounded the name Marcus Elwood. She sat across from hospital director Alan Kroll, who hadn't offered her coffee, water, or even eye contact since she entered his glass-walled office. "We're cooperating fully," he said again, folding his hands over a clipboard. "You keep saying that," Rivas said evenly, "but your access logs are full of redactions. Your surveillance hard drives are missing 3 days of data, and none of your night shift orderlies from October 12th are still employed here." Kroll didn't flinch. High turnover in low-wage roles isn't unusual. That's not a smoking gun. "Sure," she said, "but one of your rooms, OR3, had badge activity long after it was shut down for ventilation repairs, including the night Elwood disappeared." Kroll's eyes flicked just briefly. "Room 3 has been off-limits since the ceiling collapse." "No collapse was ever reported to OSHA," Rivas said, "and according to fire inspection records, the ventilation passed code a week before Marcus went missing." He exhaled sharply, then stood and walked to the window. The sun glinted off the parking lot below. "Detective, this is a busy hospital. Hundreds of lives a day. We can't afford ghost hunts." "You already did," she said quietly. 8 months ago, in OR3. Meanwhile, Mal 2 floors down. An intern named Leo Dorsey had been told to do a deep archive pull. Anything with Dr. Elwood's name on it, chart notes, post-ops, rounds records. He sat cross-legged on the basement floor, surrounded by decades of mismatched file boxes. Half the documents were water-damaged. The others were misfiled under departments Marcus never worked in. Geriatrics, dentistry, even cardiology. But as he sifted, something caught his eye. A yellow folder. No label. Inside, 3 printed emails. One was from Marcus himself, time-stamped October 10th, 2007, 2 days before he vanished. Subject: concerns about OR3 activity. To Admin Board, confidential. I am requesting an internal audit of operating room access logs for OR3. I've noted unauthorized activity after hours, including signs of recent procedures. Unlogged. Surgical carts have items missing, and there are unaccounted uses of Schedule 4 sedatives. If this is an experimental wing or trial site, I have not been briefed. I intend to escalate this if no response is received within 48 hours. Dr. Marcus Elwood. The reply, sent only 6 hours later, was short. This matter is being reviewed. Cease inquiries and follow protocol. No signature, no department tag, just a nondescript hospital server address. Detective Rivas took the letter in silence when Leo brought it to her. "Where'd you find this?" she asked. "Archives. It wasn't filed. It was stuffed between end-of-year inventory from 1996. Her stomach turned. She looked at the final line of Marcus's email. "I intend to escalate this." He did escalate, and then he disappeared. Autopsy request. Denied. Rivas requested access to any cadaver logs or unclaimed bodies during the week of October 12th, cross-checking for anonymous surgical cases. The hospital compliance office delayed her for days. When the list finally arrived, it was heavily blacked out, but one item stood out. October 13th, 2:37 a.m., linen chute maintenance alert. Unusual obstruction, sanitized. No report filed. She cross-referenced it with the security footage. That exact minute, 2:37 a.m., the same time Marcus's pager last pinged, was when an unidentified orderly had pushed a sedated patient toward the linen chute. Except no staff member had logged a patient transfer then. There was no accompanying chart. And the chute's internal temperature registered a spike, likely from warm biological material, immediately after. Rivas stared at the maintenance log. Obstruction. Sanitized. No report. If Marcus's body had been wrapped and dropped into the chute, depending on how deep it went and what waste systems it fed into, she swallowed hard. That pager hadn't just fallen. It had been flushed, with intent. Back to the footage. Rivas pulled the hallway footage again. She slowed it frame by frame. The figure pushing the gurney was blurred, but there were clues. Height, approx. 6'2". Left-handed, the way he pushed and pulled. Limp in right knee, no ID badge. Scrubs with no hospital logo. She zoomed in on the gurney. The patient's face wasn't visible, but their left wrist, pale, limp, had a hospital band. She paused and isolated the frame. The patient being wheeled wasn't unconscious. They were intubated, which meant there had been a surgical procedure somewhere very recently. But where? OR3 was supposed to be shut down. A whisper from the past. That evening, she called Marcus's sister, Helen Elwood, a biotech analyst who lived 2 states away. She hadn't spoken publicly about the case since November. "I don't do interviews," Helen said coldly. "I'm not a reporter. I'm the one trying to stop this place from burying your brother twice." Silence. "I need to know if Marcus ever told you anything strange, anything off about St. Emery's." Helen's voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "He told me they were experimenting." "On what?" "I don't know. He said he saw a nurse bring in a patient with no ID, no chart, no name, just rolled them in, then locked OR3 for 3 hours, no surgery listed. When he asked questions, someone warned him to stay in his lane." Rivas felt her pulse rise. "Did he say who warned him?" "No, but the night before he disappeared, he left me a voicemail." "Do you still have it?" Helen paused. "I never listened to it. I couldn't. Not until now." Helen emailed the file. The message was faint, recorded while Marcus was walking. Footsteps echoed under fluorescent lighting. His voice was fast, tense, barely controlled. "Helen, I don't know what's happening. OR3 is active, has been for weeks, but nobody's talking. I saw someone today. He wasn't staff. I think they're doing something off books. Transfers, tissue samples, maybe worse. If anything happens to me..." Click. The message cut off mid-sentence. Rivas listened to it 6 times. There was something at the very end, barely audible. She isolated it, amplified, filtered background. In the final 2 seconds, there was a mechanical hum, then the soft hiss of a gas vent, and then a voice, male, whispering. Too late. St. Emery Regional Medical Center, Sublevel Blue Archive. 2 days after receiving Marcus Elwood's cut-off voicemail and the whisper, "Too late," Detective Naomi Rivas stood in a forgotten hallway beneath the hospital's east wing. The carpet was threadbare. Ceiling tiles sagged. Half the lights flickered. She had a borrowed key from a retired janitor who called her the only one asking the right questions. The room at the end of the hall was labeled Utility 7B, but the door behind it had a different sign, almost fully scraped off. Operating, R3. She stared at the tarnished brass. OR3 had been shut down, allegedly for ventilation repairs, before Marcus disappeared. But here it was, not gutted, not sealed, still whole, still alive. She unlocked the door. Inside was a time capsule of controlled chaos, surgical carts with expired anesthetics, empty tubing packages, and a faint smell. Antiseptic trying to cover rot. The ventilation hummed softly. Rivas turned on her flashlight and scanned the room. One corner had dried footprints, boot-shaped. The EKG monitor was still plugged in. A tray of surgical tools lay rusted beside it. She moved toward the main operating light and saw something that stopped her heart cold, a blood smear, long dried, dragged from the edge of the gurney down toward the floor, and beneath the table, a red linen bag, still cinched. She crouched, pulling it out. Inside were surgical gloves, unused gauze pads, and an unmarked silver USB drive. Rivas didn't waste a second. She slipped it into an evidence bag and backed out of OR3 like it was radioactive. Because, in a way, it was. 2 hours later, police forensics lab. The USB drive was encrypted, but lightly. Old encryption, early 2000s. Once cracked, it opened one folder, OR logs, unsanctioned. Inside were 8 video files. No timestamps, no metadata. Rivas opened the first, grainy footage, an overhead view of a dimly lit operating table. A man in a surgical gown leans over a patient, fully sedated, as 2 assistants hand him tools. The patient's face is covered. There's no anesthesiologist, no chart, no vitals monitor. The surgeon works fast, but not clean. The tools aren't standard. He removes what looks like a section of liver, bags it, and walks out of frame. The patient isn't moved. The lights dim. The second video shows another patient. This one is conscious at first, panicking, muffled screams, then a mask, then silence. The screen turns black. Rivas paused the third file without pressing play, because she recognized the man in the operating gown. Not from a hospital record, from the security camera footage the night Marcus disappeared, the orderly. Except he wasn't an orderly. He was the surgeon. Illegal organ harvesting. At a licensed hospital, in a shut-down OR. Rivas felt sick. It would explain the missing badge records, the sedatives, the patients with no charts, the silence. Marcus had seen this, had started to dig, and then vanished. The linen chute, a body disposal pipeline, sanitized nightly. The sewer pump, an accident, or maybe not. Maybe someone was sending a signal. The confrontation. Director Kroll Rivas didn't knock. She dropped the evidence bag with the USB on Director Kroll's desk. His face went pale the moment he saw it. "You already knew," she said. "Didn't you?" He leaned back, fingers laced tight. "We shut it down." "When?" 2 days after Marcus went missing. "You didn't report it." Kroll said nothing. "You covered it up," she said, louder. "You knew unlicensed procedures were being performed under your roof, and instead of going to the authorities, you scrubbed files, fired witnesses, and let a good doctor disappear." He swallowed. "It wasn't that simple." "Then explain it." He stared past her, into some invisible memory. "It started in 2006. A surgeon from Belgium, here on a research visa. He showed us a model for harvesting from brain-dead donors without triggering state protocols. Claimed it was legal in Europe. Said we were wasting viable organs." "Was it legal here?" "No." "Then why did you let it continue?" Kroll's voice dropped to a whisper. "Because he saved lives. Dozens. He cut the transplant waitlist in half. Children, veterans, people who were dying." "And how many did he kill to do it?" He said nothing. She leaned in. "Was Marcus one of them?" Kroll finally looked her in the eye. "No, Marcus was going to talk. They didn't want him dead, just scared. They sedated him, hid him somewhere off-site. But something went wrong." "Where did they take him?" "I don't know. I was told he'd be released once it blew over." "But he never came back." Kroll nodded slowly. "They called me that morning, said there'd been a mistake, that he didn't wake up." Rivas felt cold. "Where's the body?" Kroll shook his head. "I never asked. Helen Elwood, a sister's demand." When Rivas told Helen the truth, the woman didn't cry. She clenched her fists until her knuckles went white, then spoke 3 words. "Dig him up." Rivas nodded. They got a warrant for the old linen chute disposal tank, long decommissioned, sealed, and forgotten beneath the western wing. It took 2 days to drain and excavate. On the third day, cadaver dogs signaled at the lower filter grate. Buried in the sediment, wrapped in an old red surgical sheet, was a partial human skeleton. The dental records confirmed it. Dr. Marcus Elwood. Inside the wrappings were shreds of his scrubs, his hospital ID badge, and a torn latex glove with his fingerprints on the inside, as if he had tried to remove it mid-sedation. The sedative was still in his tissue samples. He had been alive when he was dumped, sedated, intubated, and left to die suddenly. The public eruption. The story hit national media within days. Doctor dumped in hospital sewer to hide black market surgeries. Missing physician found in chute after 8 months in limbo. Who killed Marcus Elwood? St. Emery Hospital was shut down within a month for federal investigation. Director Kroll resigned. The Belgian surgeon vanished. Interpol issued a red notice. No arrests yet. But the USB went viral. Whistleblowers came forward. Nurses who had been silenced. Interns who remembered Marcus warning them. They told everything. And Helen Elwood? She took her brother's ashes and placed them in a steel urn. On its base, she engraved the final page of his journal. If I vanish, it's because I saw something I wasn't supposed to. But that doesn't make it wrong. It makes it necessary. July 2008. 1 month after Marcus's remains were found, the scandal had detonated across the medical world like a pressure bomb. St. Emery Regional Medical Center was shuttered. Licenses were suspended. Investigations spiderwebbed outward to regional health boards, transplant agencies, and international partners. But one thread remained frayed: the surgeon in the footage. He wore no badge. No documentation placed him in the system. Even Interpol's facial recognition database came back blank. As far as the world was concerned, the man performing illegal organ extractions in OR3 was a ghost. Detective Naomi Rivas called him the man with no name, until a single frame changed everything. Frame 74, File 3. Enhanced analysts combed the USB footage again, this time using frame-by-frame interpolation software. In the third video, just before the sedated patient was wheeled away, the surgeon looked up briefly, directly at the camera. His eyes were mismatched, one brown, one gray-blue, and on his right wrist, barely visible beneath the glove, was a birthmark. A surgical cross, a symbol used by a defunct research institute in Prague. Cross-referencing facial geometry and institute records, Interpol flagged a potential match: Dr. Elias Kuhlman, specialist in neurochemical sedation and deep state transplants, disgraced in 2005 for unapproved field trials on coma patients, disappeared after revocation of license, passport never used again, believed dead. Except now, he wasn't. He was alive, and he'd been operating inside a U.S. hospital, unlicensed, undetected, for nearly a year. Rivas flew to Prague. The Institute of Experimental Neurology, where Kuhlman once held a directorship, was now abandoned. But an aging former colleague agreed to meet her at a cafe under the condition his name not be recorded. He always believed the brain was a switch, the man told her. On, off. Coma wasn't death to him, it was raw potential. The body was just a system. Plug it in, harvest what you need. Were his trials voluntary? At first, then not so much. Did you ever think he'd kill to prove his theory? The man's eyes darkened. He believed death was reversible. So to him, no one truly died. The real reason Marcus was targeted. Back in the States, Helen Elwood received a manila envelope with no return address. Inside were copies of research forms. Marcus's name was on every page. Consent signatures, all forged. He'd been added as a study contributor to a covert project titled Deep State Viability Under Prolonged Sedation, DSVPS. It outlined protocols for keeping patients sedated for up to 28 days while harvesting regenerative tissue. The forms were dated 2 weeks before Marcus disappeared. He hadn't just stumbled on something. He was being framed for it. One last message. A cyberforensics expert discovered a deleted folder on the USB drive. Most files were corrupted, but one video partially recovered. The timestamp: October 11th, 2007, 10:53 p.m. Marcus sat in a dark room, clearly agitated, whispering into his phone's camera. I think this guy, this consultant, he's not just harvesting organs. I think he's using the sedatives to keep people in suspended states, like half dead. He's tracking their tissue response over time, and I think he's using the chute system to get rid of mistakes. He paused. Someone forged my name. They're going to blame me. He looked up. If you're watching this, I didn't run. Click. The screen went black. The search for Kuhlmann Interpol traced a fake identity linked to Dr. Elias Kuhlmann, Edward M. Krieg, a German-born bioresearch consultant who entered the U.S. via a shell company used for academic visas. Passenger manifests showed that Krieg had left the U.S. 3 days after Marcus vanished. His flight landed in Montevideo, Uruguay. Interpol moved swiftly. By August, an elite team raided a secluded hilltop facility labeled Neurological Recovery Research Center. They found sedatives, surgical equipment, a trauma bay, but no patients, and no Kuhlmann. He had vanished again. But not without leaving something behind. Inside a locked cabinet was a sealed envelope, addressed in block letters, H. L. Wood. Rivas flew to Helen to hand-deliver it. Inside was a short note, typed on translucent paper. Your brother was brilliant. He wanted to save people, but the world doesn't reward that. It punishes it. He walked into a room he couldn't walk out of. And that's a shame. He would have made an excellent partner. E.K. Helen sat frozen as she read it. Then, without a word, she burned the note in a steel ashtray. A deeper silence. St. Emery's remained boarded up, its hallways now empty except for the occasional security check. But urban explorers began posting photos. OR3 untouched, red linen bags still stacked, surgical tables still stained. Authorities sealed the wing permanently. No one argued, because even with Marcus's death confirmed, something about the case refused to close. One of the USB videos had been tampered with, File 6. Forensics eventually recovered part of the final frame. A man, conscious, strapped to the table. The face? Not Marcus. Someone else. Still alive, still aware, still waiting to be forgotten. September 2008. 2 months after the raid in Uruguay. The image recovered from USB File 6 haunted Detective Naomi Rivas. It was just one frame. A frozen moment. A man, awake, wide-eyed, strapped to an operating table. His mouth was sealed shut with medical tape, and an IV line ran into his arm. But the horror was in his eyes, unmistakably aware, fully conscious. And alive. But who was he? Forensics had isolated just enough metadata from the file to extract a code embedded in the frame title. PX0173A Patient X, entry number 173, Subject A. But there were no known medical records, and no hospitals reported missing patients under that name, except a retired nurse from St. Emery's came forward anonymously. She'd seen something. The whisper nurse. She identified herself only as Sharon, an LPN who'd worked night shifts for nearly 20 years. She never wanted to talk, until now. I used to deliver surgical kits to the ORs, she said, but OR3, we were told not to go in there, ever. Who told you? Rivas asked. Security. They said it was a liability zone, ventilation issues, risk of infection. But I heard things, Detective. I saw stretchers rolled in with no names. I even caught one man, tall, mismatched eyes, pulling patient charts from the shredder. Kuhlmann. Did you see Marcus that night? Sharon hesitated. I saw someone in blue scrubs wheeled into the linen hallway. I couldn't see the face. But the orderly? He wasn't ours. Didn't say a word. Just smiled. He had this tattoo on his wrist. A surgical cross? She nodded slowly. I thought it was a cult, she whispered. Rivas leaned forward. What happened to the man on that stretcher? Sharon looked away. I think he became Patient X. PX 073A. The ghost in the footage. Interpol's psychological profiler analyzed the recovered frame. Their report was blunt. Subject is conscious, cognitively responsive, and likely sedated but not anesthetized. He is experiencing maximum awareness under immobilization. This violates every known ethical standard of surgical care. Purpose unclear, may be related to observational tissue response or neurobehavioral recording. In plain terms, he was being studied while slowly dying. Not for medical treatment, but for data. They theorized that PX0173A might have been kept alive for days, possibly weeks, under Kuhlmann's experimental sedative cycles, microdosing coma states, then pulling the subject back into partial consciousness, a living experiment. Back to St. Emery's. The basement wing urban explorers had swarmed the hospital, posting shaky footage of the decaying halls. Most of it was harmless: graffiti, broken ceiling tiles, tagged morgue drawers. But one user, at Vital Signs Below, posted something different. In a TikTok clip titled, "Shh, OR3 Still Breathes," the camera showed an elevator panel in the old East Wing. The button for sub-basement level 2 wasn't labeled. It shouldn't have existed. Rivas recognized the panel. That floor had been sealed decades ago after a flooding incident. Or, so she'd been told, she ordered a private inspection under federal warrant. Sub-basement level 2. The elevator groaned as it descended. Dust fell from overhead. The lights flickered, then steadied. The doors opened to darkness. A stale, clinical cold hit her face. The air smelled of antiseptic and rust. They moved with flashlights. 3 agents, 2 forensic officers, and Rivas leading. Half the floor was storage. Old gurneys, outdated surgical equipment, biohazard bins long expired. But behind a steel door labeled Observation Chamber B, they found it. A room with 1 bed, an IV drip still in place, electrodes, a biometric pad, and, mounted to the wall, a single camera, blinking red, recording, still live. The tapes. In an adjacent room, they found servers, dozens of them, active. Cooling fans whirred softly. Over 170 hours of footage, the same bed, different people, all unconscious, some struggling, some motionless, some eventually gone. But in a series labeled PX0173, they found 6 continuous days of video. Subject: male, late 30s, Caucasian, brown eyes, strapped to the table. It was patient X. Day 1, he blinks. His pupils track the camera. Day 2, he tries to scream, veins bulging under the tape. Day 3, tears roll down his cheeks. A tube is inserted into his abdomen. Day 4, no motion, eyes glassy. Day 5, flatline. Day 6, empty bed, no sound, no staff, just routine. Who was he? Forensics isolated biometric markers from the footage, vein patterns, eye structure, and partial fingerprints left on the railing from when he strained his hand. Cross-referenced with national missing persons databases. A hit. Name: Vincent C. Monroe. Age: 38. Reported missing. September 2007. Last seen: parking garage, St. Emery Regional. Profession: biomedical engineer, former contractor for hospital R&D. He wasn't just a patient. He may have helped build the very system that sedated and recorded him. Helen Elwood reviewed his case. He and Marcus emailed, she said. I checked the metadata. Vincent warned Marcus not to ask questions. Their last exchange: Vincent: they're not running research, Marcus. They're running removal. Stop digging. Marcus: then we're both already too deep. Neither man walked out of St. Emery's alive. Unlisted names. As Rivas compiled the recovered footage, she found more labels: PX0174, 015, 16, and 0181. The last was the shortest, just 27 minutes of footage. A woman, early 20s, blonde, sedated. Helen recognized her. Her name was Marcy. She volunteered for a med trial in 2007, never came home. No one ever linked her to St. Emery's. Until now, the unthinkable. Interpol's final forensic audit estimated that between 2006 and 2008, at least 22 individuals were subjected to prolonged sedation and non-consensual organ or tissue harvesting. At least 9 had been kept awake. Alive, for study, for sale, for control. The missing pager, the hidden floor, the untraceable surgeon. All of it pointed to one conclusion. Marcus hadn't been the first. He'd been the last to speak, but not the last to die. October 2008, 1 year since Dr. Marcus Elwood vanished. His body had been recovered, the hospital shut down, the footage released, Interpol warrants issued, victims identified. The truth, finally, surfaced. But Detective Naomi Rivas couldn't let it go, because one thing still didn't make sense. The pager. It was a Motorola Flex Series standard hospital issue from 2004, submerged in biofluid and sewer sludge for months, yet when it coughed up through the pump, it still looped the same eerie message, OR3 now. How? How had it stayed powered? And more disturbingly, who triggered it? The tech that shouldn't work. An electronics specialist from Homeland Security examined the pager. His report was brief, almost embarrassed. Power cell degraded, no backup battery, no data integrity. And yet, message persisted, as if it was being refreshed wirelessly. But this model isn't capable of that. Which left two options. 1, a modified pager, remotely updated. 2, someone kept it active, intentionally. From somewhere inside the hospital, the pager had become more than a relic. It was a beacon. But for who? Or what? The final footage, recovered and redacted. 2 more USB drives were discovered during the demolition of St. Emery's sublevels. Each drive bore only a single file, named with a timestamp, and nothing else. October 12, 2007, 2:37 a.m. The exact moment Marcus Elwood vanished. In the recovered clip, Marcus enters OR3. He looks disoriented. His pager buzzes. He checks it. Then he stops, as if hearing something off camera. He turns and smiles, a soft, unsettled smile. Then a voice, male, calm, slight German accent. "You followed the call." "Why?" Marcus asks. "Because you're curious. Good doctors are." Suddenly, a burst of gas erupts from a ceiling vent. Marcus coughs, drops the pager, stumbles, reaches for the crash cart. Then, darkness. The footage ends, but in the final milliseconds, frame by frame, analysts caught a blurry figure entering the room. Not Kuhlman, a woman, short, dark hair, lab coat, carrying an injector and a clipboard, with Marcus's chart, name, ID number, sedative dosage, and a tag, Stage 1, Observational Conditioning. She hadn't just helped silence Marcus, she had documented it. Helen's theory. After months of interviews and silence, Helen Elwood agreed to speak publicly. Not to mourn, to warn. This wasn't about money, not really, not even about medicine. It was about control, about who gets to decide what a human body is worth. They didn't kill Marcus to cover something up. They used him, documented him. He became part of their blueprint. She paused. Which means someone still has that blueprint. The horror wasn't that Kuhlman existed. It was that he had help, assistants, administrators, data analysts, planners, a system, and systems don't vanish. They replicate. The pager rings again. On November 2nd, 2008, a maintenance crew in Detroit discovered an old pager lodged in a hospital incinerator duct at Glenridge Medical, recently acquired by a corporate healthcare conglomerate. The message looped, frozen on the same 2 words, OR3 NOW. Except this hospital had no OR3. There were only 2 operating rooms, and yet, when investigators followed the duct trail, it led to a boarded-up suite. Behind it, a private surgical bay, unused, or so it was claimed, but on the inner doorknob, faint, greasy, but clear, was a thumbprint. It matched Marcus Elwood. Impossible? Or planned? The pattern emerges. In the months that followed, a university hospital in Sao Paulo uncovered a hidden room with red linen bags and unlabeled sedatives. In South Korea, A trauma center reported a briefcase filled with USBs discovered in a defunct OR, footage encrypted with the same prefix, PX OR173. And in Boston, a biolab technician posted an anonymous forum message. They never stopped, they just moved. OR3 isn't a place, it's a signal. When you get the page, it means your role is ready. The message was deleted 43 seconds later, but not before it was archived. Where the dead still whisper Detective Rivas stood one last time at the demolished edge of St. Emery's, now a leveled gravel lot. The air was sharp, cold, the ground wet from overnight rain. In her coat pocket she still carried Marcus's pager. Dead now, or at least it had been, until 3:12 a.m. when it buzzed in her pocket. She stopped breathing, pulled it out, and on the flickering screen, after a year of silence, the words reappeared. OR3 NOW, except this time, below it, a second line blinked. Faint gray. PX 0188, Rivas N. Epilogue. There was never a trial. Kuhlman was never caught. The surgeon with mismatched eyes faded into legend. Hospitals distanced themselves. Politicians condemned. Systems denied. But the files exist. The footage exists, and the pager still rings. Some say it's an urban legend, a warning from the underworld of unethical medicine. Others say it's real, that somewhere, beneath fluorescent lights and sterilized steel, a door still swings open when the page goes out. OR3 NOW. Come in, doctor. We've been expecting you.